acid. Try to get it as clean as possible. Get all the flux off it. That flux 2 or 3 years down the road is going to corrode this metal, and it's going to possibly lead to a failure of the metal. You want to, if you can't use alcohol, baking soda and water is a good idea. Neutralize that acid, clean it up, polish it a little bit. If you've ever taken an old plane apart, you'll see that a year later, 2 years later, that horn is good and rusty and corroded and can't be doing you any good if it's like that. I even like to put a little coat of silver paint on these before I put them in the plane. So now I'm going to make some little brass bushings for here, and this will be ready to install. That'll be the next step. I'm going to clean this up right now. And what you can do is take a little piece of this strip brass, trim off a little piece. Doesn't have to be too big, that's for sure. Make yourself some little horn bushings. This works good no matter what you build. Just wrap it up around like so. Take and pinch it with the pliers. Get a good pinch in there. Leave a little tab sticking forward so you can stick that into the edge of the wing. Really no big deal to doing this, but this will keep the control horn especially good if you're coming up the ladder right now and you want to get those planes so they last. They don't start out real good and then a year later the controls wear out and everything starts falling apart on them. Once you build these planes right, they usually last longer than you want them to last. Okay, that's about all I'm going to do to that guy. Turn this off a little bit. That'll pretty much do it. That's ready to go right in the back of the old. So now obviously once we get that in there and get some dope on it, we'll put a drop of chain lube, motorcycle chain lube or something on there. Make this kind of pointy and this will make it go in a lot easier. Let's see, we want to get some kind of a reference point on tape the stab and hinges. Alright, easy way to do this would be just try to line up the middle here as best we can. Now these little braces, believe it or not, without these, that control system won't really last too long. I'm going to need a notch in the middle of this stab. You don't want to make this notch any bigger than it has to be because obviously it's going to weaken the structure. On a Nobler, the tail is relatively low aspect, short. It's really no big consequence if you put a real macho notch in here. But if you're dealing with a 60 ship, you really like to have as little notch as possible. In fact, on my 60 ships, I make the horn the shape of a boomerang so that I don't need this big of a notch. Really don't like to have that big notch in there if I can at all help it. Okay, I want to take some of the burrs off of here. Roughening this up a little bit with the Dremel tool wouldn't hurt either. Couldn't hurt. Want to make sure it's straight this way. go gluing it. I'm going to press it in so that half of the wire is shoved into the horn itself. There we go. Let's get that evened out. Hot stuff off. And just make sure we got this dead accurate before we put any more glue on it. That looks pretty accurate. Looks pretty decent. Match this side out. Get some clearance for that horn when it goes down to 45 degrees. Doesn't have to go more than 45 degrees. Trolls usually don't deflect more than 45 degrees anyway. It's about as far as that's going to deflect. Now that horn is in there good and solid. Try to free it up with a little bit of oil later once we get the hinges in and everything. And the other thing we want to do is put a little bit of a brace around the back of the horn. Kind of keep that solid. Put another thing in. I'll use the thick hot stuff and build up a little fillet there. This is the thicker of the type of hot stuff. Put a little fillet around that. I think on a 35 ship that'll hold. Now what I do on a 60 ship, I wrap a little piece of carbon fiber around there and kind of tie it all in, but I don't think there's that much of a load on these 35 ships. I don't think we'll have to do that. I think this will spread the load just enough. That'll be good. Then kick it from far away, don't kick it up close. Obviously you're going to get some down in the horn, so you can just work that free, put a little drop of oil on it if you're real fanatical about it. That looks like it'll be alright. Now the next thing I want to do, we'll get rid of the copper parts we were using. We don't need that anymore. And we'll start lining up these elevators. Now I want to notch the edge of this elevator out. I want to put a notch in there, and I want to run that horn right along the edge. Now that's as far out as that have to go. Got to do a little bit of notching here. And this is always a nice, good opportunity to cut yourself right here. And remember, this is almost like balsa plywood because we've got two different kinds of grain going back and forth. You could use a Dremel tool here, wouldn't be a bad idea. That's the way that's going to get assembled. That's just about nice. Okay. I'd like to get that in a little more. I want to harden up the wood by putting hot stuff in there too before, and then I'll cap it with 64th plywood, 32nd balsa, really anything. Doesn't really matter if the wood is hard enough. First thing you want to do is kind of get that wood Nice gouged out so that horn ain't sticking out. Good technique for that is to fold up a piece of sandpaper about 4 times until it's about the diameter of the wire. And get yourself a nice little notch gouged in there. Now when we install the hinges, that's going to slide in there. The hinges are going to go in where they go. This trick, if you, which just happened to happen on this, is I got too much hot stuff on the pin itself and the hinges get sticky. A little bit of acetone, you could just soak a Q-tips in acetone, good old-fashioned acetone. Just soak it right in. It'll loosen up the hot stuff, much like the bonder does. Okay, whoop, that one's ready to go. This one, nice and loose. This is a nice little trick. I guess everybody could benefit from this. And just keep rubbing that Q-tip. Get all that hot stuff from away from the pin. Once that dries, you'll be all set. The acetone dries right up real fast. You don't have to worry about it. And just scrub away at that hot stuff and get it off. This one's still stuck. We'll have to soak that a little bit longer. Acetone does a real nice job of drying out your hands too. You want to get grease off your hands just before you do some finishing. Just wipe them with acetone. The other one is okay. This is the only one that needs to be cleaned up. This one's starting to loosen up now. You can see that it turns the hot stuff into chewing gum. Obviously, if you put a little oil on the pin first, it reduces the possibility this will happen, but it still happens. And I got some hot stuff in by the horn too. This freed up the horn. That one's real nice now. This one's coming back to reality. I'll soak these right up. Be all set. Alright, we got the elevators glued in. Everything's kind of getting free. Now we want to cap off that end with 1/16 with the grain going this way. Again, 1/4 grain. And we'll trim that up to shape. Just get that out of the way. That's an important part of capping it all off. Then what we're going to do is take it out in the backyard. Looks like it's getting sunny out there now. And we'll block sand this whole shape in. Try to get this whole thing block sanded in real nice and neat. This will make a nice straight edge. And we'll check it out that it's exactly the same shape as the plans. Going to have to trim the tips out. I left that oversized so we could get exactly the right curve in there. Okay, we want to get this corner up by the horn in nice and tight. I'm trying to get through this in a hurry because lunchtime's coming up and I'm getting hungry. Okay. Now we're basically going to trim that all off. You'll block sand the rest of it right in. You don't have to worry about that. That horn is in there to stay. That horn is in 100 times stronger than it would be if we did it the way the plans show. It'd be real easy to tweak that back and forth. It's in a solid piece of wood with the grain going in 3 different directions. It's all 1/4 grain wood and it's soaked with hot stuff, so it's in a nice solid mount. On a 60 ship, I like to take a piece of bass or a piece of hardwood. An old landing gear block from a foam wing is good. Motor mount material is just about overkill. And run that horn in some solid wood. Alright, I'm going to go block sand this guy out, and that'll be about the end of building the tail. Then we'll start doping and silk spanning it. And okay, we just come back in from the yard. We'll block sanded this out. All the hinges are in. We got to free them up a little bit. We'll drop of oil on it before we finish it. Got the horn bay locked in there real good. pretty much got everything block sanded, so everything is equal out here, equal. Want to look down there and make sure the elevators are nice and straight. Everything is straight. Look from the front. See that my center line in the middle, I haven't wandered off center too much. Everything looks like it's real good on this tail. Now the final thing is, if you look down here, you're going to see that that hinge gap closes up unequally. Right here it's closed, and here we've got a little bit of a gap. Now that's really not what we want, because as these controls come up into play, if one side seals before the other, it's going to do that on a tail or a flap. So the last part of getting this squared away before we actually start the dope finish will be to even out these gaps. Try to get the same hinge line on both sides, so that if we decide to go without a sealed flap hinge line and a sealed elevator hinge line, well, this will modulate in real nice. It won't become an on-off switch at some point where one elevator will seal and one won't. And that's the reason a lot of planes have little built-in funnies, is they don't seal up equally. A lot of times sealing the elevator hinge line will get away from them funnies, even if it doesn't do anything else. Now, from looking down this one looks pretty decent right off the board, but you have a big sanding block and some 180 paper thumbtack to it, and you can get that line almost perfect. It really pays to take an extra 10 minutes and get that line real perfect, so that when it seals up, when you look down it, you can see it all seal at the same time. And once you have that, you're in pretty good shape. The last thing, obviously, before we put the plans away, is going to be to just kind of screw everything up on this. Since most of this we did already, we can get rid of any rib that's a little bit too high. We've still got the plans out. Want to constantly check that the elevators are the same, that they move the same. We got the same amount up and down movement. These will have to do this way because the horn will interfere with it. And this will be the added touches. When you put your plane down in appearance row, maybe the judges won't even see it, but you'll know it's there. And when some of the people that are really good builders come and check your plane out, they'll be impressed. Because this is what really separates the planes in the top rows. A little attention to detail. You can rub your hand here and see that that's a perfect blend. Perfect blend over here. You don't have one elevator riding higher than the other. It's important to get some of that done. Make sure that there's no high spot on a hinge line. That'll give you all kind of crazy funnies. Nice and true, a nice airfoil shape. We're real close to the center line on all sides. Have a little notch in there for the horn. And the last thing is to marry it up with the plans. Boy, that sucker is right on the money. That is a real good tail. I don't even have to weigh that to know that that's super light. We can get rid of the plans now. Put these plans back in the box with the templates. I'm not going to be using that. The next step, I guess, we're going to start laying out the wing. So, for whatever reason, again, this is on drafting Mylar, which you can get at any drafting supply store. Next time I want to build an oval or a reference off it, repair one, I've got me a template. I don't have to destroy the original plans that come with the kit. That's ready. That's a mirror image of that. And we can move on. I'm going to put 2 coats of dope on this. First thing I want to do, before I do the dope even, this is important and I won't spend too much time on a video doing it, but I'll show you that it has to be done, should be done, before you actually do the applying of the dope. You can get a piece of 320 or 400. This is 400 right now. Every edge where the silk span is going to rest on a rib, every edge, around here, around here, around here, every edge should be radiused. And I don't have any real speed way of doing that other than just take a piece like so. Should radius those edges. That's important. If you don't, the silk span will tend to get real tight on them. There'll be a razor edge there, and it's going to pop through eventually. 10 years, 8 years, 1 year. I don't like to use any shrink dope unless the silk span won't come out tight. I'm going to get these edges in here. Nice radius on everything. I'll just do one bay, show you how much time this should take. All around. This will really add the final touch too. When you see those ribs shining in the sun, you'll see a nice radiused edge on them. You won't see any sharp spots. You won't have a tendency to pop the silk span there. That silk span on an airplane does more work per ounce than anything on the airplane as far as giving it strength. You probably add 3/4 of an ounce of silk span to a plane, and it adds more rigidity than anything. Obviously these edges should be radius. You want no sharp edges. The sharp edge means you're going to buff through the paint. This edge should be radius now. We can radius around the whole edge in one swoop. Start putting our final sanding into this. A lot of people like to put a coat of clear dope on the rib structure. Not a bad idea. Keep the moisture out of it. There's one final thing I almost forgot to do, and I'm going to do it right now, and that is get yourself an ice pick for sure. And start at one end of the ribs and put a hole in every rib. And the reason for that is if you don't, somewhere in this airplane you've got to have a hole. I just broke a rib, how nice. Somewhere in this airplane you've got to have a hole to let out the hot air. And I'll just show you how to prepare that real quick. If you don't have a hole to let out the hot air, what's going to eventually happen is from being out in the sun, especially if it's not a white airplane, if it's red or black or green or something, what's going to happen, I'll show you there's no big deal when you break a rib. What happens is it tends to balloon up on you and fill up with air now. All of my I-beam planes did that, all my D-tube planes. The wing is not too important. You have holes in the ribs, but if you make flaps or elevators, the dope really does seal them up. And you know oil isn't getting in if air isn't getting out, so I want to be real careful to get the alignment right on this before I hit it with the hot stuff. Okay, and everybody breaks a rib from now and then. Nothing unusual about that. I've broken about 6 of them in making this. Part of the game. But anyway, everything, a pinhole is plenty good. Just don't seal it up with dope. And then somewhere in the final structure, before you actually fly the plane or take it out in the sun, you should somewhere out here on the bottom put a pinhole so that she can expand and contract. And if you don't do that, I guarantee it's going to puff up on you somewhere down the road. You're going to have a puffy stunt ship. My Relentless had sealed surfaces, sealed flaps and elevators, and boy, when they puffed up, was it unbelievable. Looked like somebody had an air hose fitting on there and just kept putting air in. Now on this side, obviously one of the things we could do is even put an air hole in there. Then we'll put some air holes down in here. Do not want these things to be puffing up if possible. And obviously don't dope down in and seal up the holes after you do this. A pin is probably enough. If you don't do this, you're definitely going to be having that crazy puffiness on a built-up airplane. And that can really be annoying. Okay, we can go right down the other line. Do the same thing over here. There's no big deal. This takes 2 minutes to do. You hope that it'll not be sealed up. Each one of these bays is going to become just like a balloon. When you put this out in the sun and that air wants to expand it, like I said, especially a red, a black, green airplane, something that isn't white. White will even do it, but the worst will be this color. Maybe what I'll do is try doing the old put a hole up there trick. See if that'll let some of the air out. I don't think so. I have like a little way of letting the air. Now I didn't do this on the rudder on one of my planes, and the rudder puffed up after all this buffing and sanding and all the work. Took it out in the sun and it just puffed up like you couldn't believe. It was terrible. Okay, again, we'll radius all these, put a coat of clear dope on it, and maybe 2 coats of clear, and be ready to silk span this. Hit it all down with 400, put the final sanding on it, and be done all the edges. I'm just going to try to hit this with a block, get off any bad high spots. Put a nice flat contour onto everything. This is 400, and this should really be just about ready for the first coat of dope right here. I think we'll put the first coat of dope on and then go for lunch. This is a whole morning's work making one of these assemblies. I especially like to get the tips real nice. Nice rounded wing tips, stab tips. Adds a little personality to the airplane. When you do this side here, you can always rub it right on. Now you got to be careful not to break the ribs. You keep the whole surface true, and don't let the edge of the sandpaper catch a rib. Notice I'm only using the middle of the block now. I'm not using the end of the block. The end of the block will catch a rib, and that'll be the end of that action. Okay. What I have here is clear dope, clear light coat, and it's got penetrating thinners in it, which means not necessary to have that, but one of the things it does, it lets the first coat of dope penetrate into the wood real good, and that's what I'll try to do right now. Putting some of this. A good alternative will just be a 50-50 coat of light coat, would probably be just as good. I don't want to do the ribs, I just want to do the outline where the silk span is going to attach. Again, 2 coats of this is usually enough. Give it an hour or so to dry between coats, get in by the hinges good. This will stiffen up the wood a little bit too, so you're not constantly dinging it every time you rub a button or a zipper or something on your shirt. Being this is real soft, nice, light, punk out wood, this is really absorbing dope like a sponge. I'll probably be able to give this the second coat in a matter of minutes. It's always good to do this outdoors. The smell of this dope is pretty disgusting. Well, the phone's ringing. Let me answer the phone. A good alternative finish, if you want to save a little bit of weight and make things a little bit more sophisticated, you can put your first coats of dope on with nitrate. Now, the only constraint on nitrate is once you put nitrate on, hot stuff is not going to stick to it. You have a problem. So, if you use butyrate right from the word go, Sig Light Coat is, again, my choice. If you use butyrate, you can use hot stuff to join the wing, the tail, make repairs, whatever. When you use nitrate, sometime you have a problem repairing nitrate. Or gluing a wing into the body with nitrate can be a real problem. The hot stuff doesn't want to kick over, even with kicker. Some chemical reaction there. Now, I'm not doing the ribs. I'm only doing the outline of this. I'm going to give it 2 nice solid coats about an hour apart, and this will be ready for silk spanning tonight. Maybe we'll even get to do the video on a silk span. I don't know how much time we're going to have tonight. Probably that time of the week that I should be taking my wife out for dinner. She's probably going to be good and sick of me being down in the cellar, but anyway, we'll get our 2 coats on, and then we're going to go take our lunch break. And tonight we'll try to do tonight or tomorrow we'll definitely do the silk span on this. Get that started. Good basic finish. If you happen to have slow drying thinner, penetrating thinner, retarder, whatever, put a little bit in the dope on the first coat. What that does, it lets the initial coat of dope sink into the wood, swell the grain up, and then when you do your second block sanding, just before you silk span it, all the high spots will come off the wood instead of waiting until the second or third coat of filler. You can save yourself a little bit of work that way. Again, penetrating thinner, all it means is it's a slow drying thinner. You can buy it in any body shop. There's no reason to use anything but, from that point up, no reason to use anything but 3608S. Any of the regular cheap thinner. Keep in mind, the cheaper it is, the better it'll be for all purposes. It won't swell the grain of the wood. It won't go in there and loosen up the finish. Alright, we're going to put this aside to dry. Go have lunch. And we got ourselves a nice... We're going to do a little bit of work on the body now. One of the most important things, I made 2 of these fuse sides. is to get a center line on the fuse sides. Okay, once you do that, the rest is kind of easy. Now what I did, I used a ruler in this way, and I make a little jig. And this jig has a notch in it, and I slide that notch, line up the ruler, line up the ruler, line up the ruler, check the alignment all the way down the ruler, scribe the center line. Same thing on the other. Because what I'm going to do when I finally get done having the wing and the body, I want to line the flaps up on that line. Put a little drop of hot stuff there, get them in dead neutral, and then get my elevators in dead neutral. Now what's also important is to get a mirror image of the fuse sides. Get them exactly the same. And let's see how close we got these. These are a little off in the front, but that's no consequence. Try to mirror image them up. We're going to use the top of the fuse side for a center line. These are pretty nice. This way the cowl fit will be perfect up here. The cowl fit here will be perfect. We got a nice, that looks pretty good in there. I bevel this back so we don't have a stress end place where the stress ends right in one spot. You want to kind of taper out any stress end. No holes at all in the motor mount. Yeah, that looks like that's going to be pretty decent. Now getting that center line on is absolute top priority, and then making sure that they're mirror images. Once we have that much, now I'm going to have to bend me up some landing gear wire. This kit didn't come with landing gear wire, so I'm going to have to make a template of the landing gear shape and then bend me up some 1/8" music wire. And then the next step will be to glue the front. Alright, we're trying to get some work done on the body here. I glued in the two formers, just tacked them in with hot stuff, nice and solid. Now I want to get the body lined up before I actually go ahead and assemble everything with the final setting. And what I want to do for sure is pin the tail together. That's step number one. On some planes it pays to hot stuff the tail together, and this one I'm just going to use tape. Try to get it dead even. Okay, that's what we want, dead even. I want to see how this is starting to line up. It looks like it's lining up pretty decent. Pretty decent. 90 degrees, 90 degrees. Everything looks decent down here. That's straight, that's straight, that's straight. Okay, that looks relatively good. I think we can go with that. Just let that hot stuff set up. Notice I got it flat on the table, flat on the building table, as flat as possible anyway. Run a little thin hot stuff down there that'll set up real good. Looks real nice and straight that way. Nice and flat relative to the table. off now. Okay, we got a little bit of a spring in here. Leave that together. And I'm just hot stuffing the tail end together now that we got a pretty good gauge on it. Okay, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Okay, I'll go over these joints with thick hot stuff now, make a little fillet in there. I want to try to seal that area between the motor mounts and the firewall just in case the tank ever leaks, we don't get the middle of the wing soaked. It's nice and solid. Now in an oval like this, the tank actually becomes part of the structure. Normally if this was a 60 ship with a removable tank, we would be doubling up and gusseting all these joints. On this type of construction, with the tank actually being part of the structure, there's no reason to do that. Obviously the downside of this type of system, if the tank ever leaks, you got to cut half of the nose apart to get the tank out. It can get to be a real mess. Let's hope we don't ever have to do that. I'll just gusset all these joints. A good choice here is if you want to do the nose with epoxy, that sure wouldn't hurt. But this hasn't seemed to give me any problems so far. The plane I made in 80 is still in one piece. So I guess this is okay. Obviously we're going to need the gas tank as the next step. I don't have the gas tank now. If I had it, we could go ahead and use the gas tank. Go ahead and install that permanently now. Okay. I'm going to get plenty of glue in by the landing gear. That's probably where it'll take a beating first, right in by the landing gear bulkhead. And that pretty much gives us a start on having a nice crutch. That's a good start. You can see any of that. Got a nice center line on the body. We got the gear in nice and solid. Tailpiece in. Pretty much ready to drill for the motor mounts, even off the nose. Well, this is the amount of progress we got done so far. Got the stab in one piece. The body kind of framed out. Ribs are framed out. Spar. Guess we can start on the wing tomorrow. Body formers are cut out. All the original kit parts are back in the kit. And we got 3 coats of clear dope on the stab. This looks like it'll be ready to cover tomorrow. And that's the end of another day. Another lucky day of building. And I think we got some work we got to do on one of these planes tomorrow. I got to look at the list. But we'll try to get some more. Alright, it's 5:30 in the morning here. We're ready to go to work on this stab. We're ready to do the silk span. We got 3 coats of butyrate dope. I put a little bit of blue dye in the dope, or blue dope in it. Make sure nothing warped up here. Everything looks good. Make sure I have the pinhole in all the ribs so it ventilates. Make sure the hinges don't have too much dope in them. Shake it up a little bit. Okay, what I'm going to basically do here, cut it one piece of silk span, try to cover this whole thing wet in one shot, which I think we'll be able to do with no problem. We better make two pieces of silk span at the same time. Ken Thompson's going to be coming over later today, so may get him to do some. So he's going to bring his note kit over. We're going to do some stuff on the video, I hope. Now I like to put the tissue on wet, so what I'm going to have to do is atomize that, get a little bit of water. Have to go fill up the atomizer. Okay, all we're going to do is just get this tissue a little bit damp. Doesn't have to be soaking wet. Damp is good. What we're going to try to do is cover both sides without a big time gap in between them. We don't want one side to shrink and then the other side not to shrink. This is 00 tissue. I use 00 tissue on everything. I don't like Jap tissue too much. And heavy silk span seems an unnecessary extra weight. Just blot that out. Then I'm doing this on a glass table. I got a nice damp silk span. Okay. We'll do the bottom first for practice. Might be a good idea to always do the bottom first. Again, this is the same dope we used to dope the surfaces before. It's got a little bit of blue dye in it just so we can see where the dope is going. Now we're not going to do the ribs, we're only going to do the outline. The ribs don't get any dope on them. We want the perimeter to shrink nice and tight over all the ribs equally. And then when we actually put some dope on the covering, the open bays, they'll stick to each rib individually. But right now we don't want it to stick to the ribs. Now this already has 3 coats of dope on it, so this dope is really going in and softening up the dope underneath it, much like glue. You got to pick a brush that has about the same outside as the rim. Otherwise you're going to wind up with all drips and drools all over the place. And normally I would be building these elevators separate from the regular airplane, but like I said, I wanted to do this in traditional manners. Just see how much of this I forgot along the way. I usually build the elevators separate, the stabs separate, everything separate. Then after it's buffed out I put the hinges in. But right now this way I want to go back in time and try it this way. This is the way I would have done this had we been building in the 50s. Not one thing would have changed. I'd be using the same dope, same tissue, same everything. So we really are building a 50s airplane here. It'd be interesting to see just how good this flies relative to the modern high-tech everything that we have. These planes that supposedly are so much better than a Nobler, we're sure going to find out one way or the other. I know one thing for sure, this will fly well. Odds are pretty good it's never going to get scored well, but it'll fly well, no doubt about that. Now remember, I have to go over that. Horn. Doing this alone is a little bit of a pain. Ken Thompson couldn't get here early in the morning and I wanted to get a head start on this. I just wanted to get this done. Again, you can work from the middle out, try to get some of the wrinkles out. You got to be kind of delicate with double O. You can kind of pull it, if you watch how I'm doing this. Pull it away from the middle constantly. Again, we will be using no shrink dope on this. All of this is light coat. Very low shrink dope. If you go putting shrink dope on this right away, this thing is going to warp up. If you do have a bagginess to the silk span, then you might need 1 or 2 coats of shrink dope, but I wouldn't go putting too much on. Okay, we're all covered in one piece. It looks like we got very few wrinkles here. Now what's best to do is when this dries up, or semi-dry, get a brand new razor. You can only get to use that razor once or twice before it's not sharp enough to really do a nice edge trimming on this. Get around the whole perimeter of this. Now remember, because this is done wet, it's putting no tension on the structure right now until it actually dries up, and it'll take an hour or so before it dries up. We can speed that up if necessary with a hairdryer, but we won't be doing that. I'd like to cover one side and immediately turn around and cover the other side, so that when it dries, and then respray both sides, and then let it dry, so it'll dry equally and tend not to warp in one direction or the other. Now also, anytime you dope an open base structure, dope both sides. Don't ever dope one side and then put it aside to dry. Dope one side and go right out and do the other side, so that they'll kind of dry equally. That's one of the advantages of this dope that I'm using. I have penetrating thinners, or you can put a little bit of retarder in with your thinner to let it dry slow. It doesn't dry right up before you get to do the other pieces. Kind of makes it a nice way of dealing with that. Now I'm not going to try to get down into the hinge lines with this. Normally I guess I'd want to get down into the hinge lines. This one we'll just have to use a little bit of sanding sealer in the hinge lines. Now the little bit of blue that's in the dope, I guess you can see it. Well, what it does, it helps you see where you have enough dope and where you don't. You can kind of keep track of where the dope is. Without that, you just have a wood colored surface, and then you have to candle it to see where you've got dope. Still early in the morning and I haven't had my coffee yet. As soon as my wife leaves for work, I'll have a cup of coffee and this will go a lot faster. I wanted to get some dope on this so it could be drying while I was having my coffee. And a good idea for anybody is, if you plan out your work accordingly so that when you're taking a break, some dope can be drying, or some glue or something. Time management is really important if you expect to build several airplanes over the winter. You can't just haphazardly do things that waste time. There's got to be a rhyme and a reason to your coffee breaks. I usually start off early in the morning, and I like to work a little while until I get a little fatigued, and then I'll have my coffee. But if I sat and had coffee first, then I'd have to wait for this to dry. I wouldn't be able to go right on with it. And that's one of the reasons some people can build 2-3 planes every winter. And then of course you get a bigger choice of which is the best. Some people can build one plane, some people build one plane every 5 years. Okay, now we're going to look for the old razor blade trick. This is where you usually wind up cutting yourself. This is an amazing airplane. We haven't cut ourselves yet. It's playing a whole construction. Of course the razor won't come out here. I'm afraid of these razor blades. You saw how scarred up my hands are from doing this kind of stuff. There we go. Don't like working with double-edged razor blades. I always wind up picking them up in the wrong spot. We'll give this a try. I'll do the other side off the video, but keep in mind, you want to do the other side as soon as possible. You don't want to wait. You don't want one side to shrink up. Even just the water on this tissue will put some amount of tension on that structure. Keep this side wet while you're doing the beam or covering a wing. You want both sides wet and both sides dry at the same time. Alright, I just got done. Both sides, the edges are done. I re-wetted the silk span on both sides equally. Both kind of nice and damp. Now what I'll do now, looks like it's getting almost sunrise here. I'll go outside and put this out on the porch. I don't want to smell too many of these dope fumes. Raise it off all the edges nice and smooth. Just rubbing them with your hand sometime will save you some sanding. Put an extra coat of dope around the edge. Make sure it's wet equally on both sides. Put it out to dry. And the next step we're going to do here, we're going to try to set up the jig up the wing. That'll be the next step. Hopefully Kenny will be here soon. I'm going to try to block up this wing, make sure all the parts fit. First thing you're going to need if you build some kind of a wing like this, you're going to need a relatively flat table. Now this table you can buy a hollow door and a piece of glass from a hardware store to shape it a door. Probably for 20-25 bucks you can have yourself a dynamite workbench. There's milk crates holding it up off the ground. That lets me move it and store it when I'm not using it. Not a big expensive thing. You need a relatively flat table if you're going to build this wing right. Now I haven't really decided how I'm going to build this yet. I'm going to kind of jig it up and get a look at how the parts fit. I'm going to be building the outboard panel equal to the inboard panel. They'll both be the size of the larger of the two wings. That's as per Jim Greenaway's suggestion, since this model will probably be given to him at the end of the season. It's going to have his motor and tank in it. Kind of do it up the way he'd like. Looks like everything's fitting pretty good. Now I got this D-tube, so I got a bunch of little blocks just pinned the whole thing straight up and down. I have the trailing edge taped to the table. And again, this is just for a preliminary trial fit to see how accurate. Now I've cut all these parts out of good quality wood, so I don't know if they're going to interlock and marry up real nice. I guess we're going to find out real soon. And once I decide how I'm going to get this, I guess we'll proceed with the next step. I'm probably going to want to jack the trailing edge up and then run along the leading edge with a machinist ruler and make sure that it all fits before I hot stuff anything. I'm going to probably try to pin this all down so that I can, this looks like it's lining up real good. I can't believe how good this is lining up. I just broke a rib. And these parts are pretty delicate. You know, you'll break one from time to time. There's nothing you can do about it. Especially if you're Godzilla like I am. Come on, kicker, let's go. Now my wife and daughter are all out of the house. I got the whole house to myself here. I'm going to try to get this all squared away. Looks like it's lining up pretty nice. Pretty accurate job. That idea with the thumbtacks and the razor seems to work even better than I thought it would on this kind of a kit. Worked good on the Ringmaster, I know that. This kit's a little more complex. The shapes are a little more complex. They all interlock. I don't know how many hours are involved actually in building this wing, but it's probably a little more than a foam wing. Wing will probably come out a little more rigid and a little lighter. Definitely a lot less expensive. You can build this wing probably for $10 worth of balsa wood, $15 worth of balsa wood. And there's probably a lot more labor involved too, so you got to decide if you want to put the labor or the money into this project. Okay, that kind of lays it out. Now what I'm going to try to do, just put a drop of hot stuff on the trailing edge on all the ribs and just get an idea of how this is going to, this is just to tack them in. I don't want to do this permanently. I want to have this wing all tacked up before I ever start it. So let me just line one at a time up here. Get an idea, because I'm going to have to, it's going to be a little more sophisticated than this eventually. fact, what I should do this the old way and just glue the two end ones first and then work from the middle out. That'll keep it relatively straight. That's an old technique from years and years ago. Yeah, it's almost got the right set in it. I can see the end rib is coming up. So I guess this is going to be a good way to do it. We'll just go right down the row. Not stuffing these ribs in. Again, I even cut the trailing edge out of good quality wood, so it should be a nice light wing. Nice neat structure too. Keep in mind, this is real old-fashioned technology here. This is stuff they did in the 50s. This is not 80s technology, that's for sure. But it sure isn't bad. Sure is going together relatively fast. Again, I'm only tacking in the trailing edge. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to leave the whole front of it loose until I can jiggle it around and line it up with a machinist ruler to make sure it's flat on the table. Flat relative to the table. I shim up the table with IBM cards until I get it just about as close as accurate as I possibly can. Anybody who's never built a wing like this, it can be a little intimidating in the beginning, but right away it turns into a wing about a half hour into the project, and then you're all set. This is real, and obviously this could be any wing to any plane you can make built up. As long as you have a wing, a center template, and a tip template, you cut out, you sandwich in your 15 or 18 ribs or whatever, and you can build this up old-fashioned style. It can be a real nice way of building. Alright, I've got half of these glued in. I'll shut the camera off so we can save some tape when we go to marry that all up. Okay, we basically got all the ribs in. We tack glued the trailing edge in with hot stuff parallel to the table. Needless to say, this has to all be laid in and measured out from the table down, the whole leading edge. And we're going to try to catch the centers of some of these spars and ribs and stuff with the machinist ruler. Next step is going to be I'm going to have to install the leading edge. Then I'm going to have to start lining this up. This is just tack glued in now. These are still loose. I can still move this around and I can get all the twists out of it, get it all tacked in with pins and blocks, and then hot stuff that spar. Once you hot stuff that spar, it's locked. To make up a leading edge, so just glue yourself a razor blade into a little piece of wood that has a notch in it. And here I glued 2 pieces of 1/4 inch onto an old piece of wood. What you basically have then is a stripper. Now you can buy strippers. They make all kind of hobby strippers, but this is a real nice inexpensive one. Work just as good as anything you can buy in a store. Got yourself a nice piece of 1/4 inch square. There's no way I've ever seen the 1/4 inch square that comes in kits. Usually manufacturers, when they cut 1/4 inch square, they don't use the best wood in the world. They try to use up junk wood, heavy wood. So this can save you a little bit of weight too, plus you'll have a nice piece of sea grain stock. It won't be the worst wood in the world. And we're just about done with the stripper. This is a real handy little thing to have. It's just a razor blade glued in with a drop of hot stuff. It sticks up just enough. Obviously you could move that out and cut 2 or 3 at once if you wanted to mass produce any of this stuff. And you can make one up for 1/8 inch and for any size that you might need a lot of. So the next step is going to be to tack in that leading edge and glue it on. I think we'll check, just get a rough idea of how this alignment is right now. That doesn't look too bad. Looks like we'll almost be able to use that. Again, I haven't glued the ribs to the spar. Once I do that, I'm committed into it. I can't make much change then. You find out if you do the 2 ends first, line up the ribs with the plans, you'll have a pretty good start on this. You just want the minimum of glue on this, just to tack it together, because you're probably going to want to take it apart 3 or 4 times before you actually are finished. You want to slide those ribs up and down the spar too, till you get your alignment just right. Once you have the alignment right, everything is tacked in, you can go all around with the hot stuff and nail it all down nice and permanent. And for right now, this is just 1 drop on each joint, just to hold it in place. Now we got the leading edge tacked on and we have the trailing edge tacked on. The spar is not attached to the ribs yet. The next step is going to be the most critical, the alignment phase. Lining this sucker up, getting it jigged in position, and once we glue it to the spar, we're in pretty good shape then. We can go ahead and add some sheeting. This will start to look like a wing instead of a pile of balsa wood. Okay, that's one. Now we'll just duplicate the same thing on the other side. I'm looking right down, making sure I have the ribs lined up with the plans, which are underneath the glass. Protects the plans. You don't ruin a set of plans every time you build a plane. A drop on each rib is plenty right now. I've altered the plans a little bit to allow for the outboard wing being a little longer. For some reason this one don't want to marry up just right. Okay, we've got the leading edge tacked on, a little tack in the front, but of course we can still move around the spar. We can still do our alignment. Now I'm going to want to get a rough idea of how this wing lines up. And I'm going to need my machinist ruler. There. 38, 38, 38. And again, this is where you can use your little blocks of wood. Try to get it nice and even. Anywhere it needs to be jacked up, just put in one of your little blocks of wood. Squeeze this block away a little more. I'm putting a little drop of hot stuff on these as I go along. Try to maintain the integrity of this whole project. One little drop of hot stuff, you can remove it later. 38, 38, 38, 38, 38, 38. Get this just a little bit more in there. This is where it pays to take a little bit of time before you're actually going to finalize this. Once you glue that spar in, you are finished. This looks like it's drooping down over here a little bit. Too high here. Okay. Now I want to even up the spar. Don't forget the two center ribs are going to be dropping down a little bit. I'll take into account that. Even this up, even this up. This all up, okay. Two center ribs are going to be quite a bit down. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch down. This will be nice and hard. Can put one drop of glue on that just to hold it for now. Okay, everything's even. Even up the top of every rib as close as possible. Okay, now before we hit it, sure gonna wanna give that a check. Definitely wanna check that out. Okay. just gonna turn it. We're out by the center. Okay. The beauty of hot stuff is in years gone by you had to do this with Ambroid. And it'd take quite a bit of time to get all the pins in and all the glue in and everything. Now you can just run down here and boom, you're done. We got ourselves the frame of a wing here, believe it or not, in under an hour. Again, this is all just pinned in, tacked in. We can run around every glue joint with the thin hot stuff later, once we're sure that this is perfectly lined up, and we can check it in several ways. We can check it, pull it off the board and check it the other way once we get some of the sheeting on. And we kind of keep track of it as we're doing the cap strips, make sure it's not bowing one way or the other. And what we'll do, we'll jack up the trailing edge with a 1-inch block, measure it back down toward the table, make sure it stayed in alignment. Usually once you get this spar glued in, you're safe. From this point on, it really doesn't want to move too much. I'm just going down, up and down every rib here, try to build some strength into it. Starting off with a nice straight frame on the wing will be a big help toward having a real nice airplane. Again, later on we'll for sure go around and glue up every glue joint permanently, but right now this will be just fine. Now of course we're going to want to take that sanding block and true up the ribs before we put the sheeting on. True that all up. Don't want to have something like that happen. And we're going to have to put the bell crank in before we sheet the bottom. Okay. Now the hot stuff should have all kicked off. Take off all our weights. Give this a final check before we start truing this up. That is very accurate. That's plenty accurate right now. Okay, the next step is I'm going to try to middle two ribs are down quite a bit because of the distance of shooting. See, I sheeted up the leading edge, sheeted up the center, getting ready to do the leading edge sheeting. And try to true all these joints up, all these edges. Check the alignment after every step, same way we checked it before with the machinist ruler. Super important, you keep track of that alignment. You don't start wandering out of alignment as you glue parts in. Get this nice and true in the center. Nobler has double sheeting in the center. One of the reasons you never see a nobler wing fold. Real nice way to build a wing. Nice structure here. Every part of this kit came out relatively accurate. The reason for chewing all this up is you don't want to have some awful lumps in the leading edge after that sheeting goes down. A little bit of sawdust helps kick off the hot stuff too. You leave the sawdust on when you do this. Don't blow the sawdust off. Okay. With that edge. Now on this leading edge grain, we want to use A grain or B grain, no quarter grain here. We want to use the lightest pieces of wood on the inside panel, heaviest on the outside panel. Try to get some of the weight onto the outboard wing. Keep that inboard wing as light as possible. No extra weight on that inboard wing. Alright, now what I did, I glued that on like so. And because I'm going to seal this up, I'm going to run inside here with a little bead. Just make sure that we got a nice joint there. We're going to be radiusing that leading edge off with a template, and we might take a lot of that material off eventually. Alright, that looks like it's going to be a nice fit. Typical old nobler wing here. And we'll just get some glue down in here. This is slow drying hot stuff, so we have a little bit of time to work. We have about 30 seconds. It's important to get some glue on the ribs. If you don't have real good quality wood, you'll have to hit this wood with a little bit of ammonia. The ammonia will let it soak up a little better, let it bend a little better. This wood is good enough grain, it looks like it's bending right around effortlessly. Got a nice curve in it. Again, every time we make one step like this, after I'm done gluing on this leading edge, the next step is going to be to recheck all the alignments. Don't want these alignments to go out of whack. It's a real problem when they start going out of line. Now we'll just get every one nailed down here. Now once we turn the wing over, we can hit all of these joints a second time. But for right now, this is really just to keep the alignment accurate. And we'll keep this as accurate as possible. Okay. That looks real nice. The reason I'm pressing it down is to kind of get some of that things to hit the ribs. Let's see if we maintained our alignment here. And I glued all the little wood blocks to the table to keep them from moving. Okay, that stayed true as a bell. Alright, very nice. Now we'll just duplicate that on the outside. We'll throw the cap strips, finish the middle of the sheeting, and we'll be ready to turn the wing over. I guess we could even add the trailing edge while it's upside down too. Okay, we rechecked the alignment. We have both of the leading edges on, half of the center sheeting. Next step's going to be to resheet the second half of this. And we're going to put the cap strips in on this side, and then we're pretty much ready to turn it over, rejig it up, and do the bottom. And we'll put the trailing edge on. Okay, we're basically about halfway done with framing out this wing. I've been working on it about that about evens off the middle sheeting. Gives us that nice little radius edge we're looking for. Let me just hit this with some rough paper, try to block it down. Sheeting job looks pretty nice on this one. This will get off all the high spots too. Get that with a little bit smaller block. That Dremel tool got a nice radius around those corners of the sheeting, which adds a nice little touch, preserves the silk span, keeps you from buffing through in time. Make it look like a real professional job. You get this sheeting evened out. Use all quarter grain sheeting in the middle, A grain on the leading edge. A grain is the most flexible of the grains. And this is block sanding right in like a champ. Okay. A real nice finish. The way a Nobler is built with that double sheeting, it really is a nice strong wing. Really a well-engineered out piece of equipment. Okay, that pretty much takes care of that. I really don't like to sand in the shop that much. I like to take this outside as soon as I can get it off the jig and sand it outside. Next step is going to be to make some cap strips up. I like to make the cap strips out of 1/4 grain if I can. Makes them a little stiffer, add some rigidity to the wing. That one didn't come out too good. The ones that came in a kit were really terrible, so I'm going to make my whole own set of cap strips here. Again, just use the handy stripper. Can't be much easier than this. Just strip out some 16 sheet. I like to strip my own. I don't like to buy any of the sheeting that's already pre-cut. The pre-cut sheeting, I tend to use junk wood up on it. I'd rather have my own wood, and I can control the density and the 1/4 grain. This is a bad piece of wood. I don't want to use that. I'll just make myself up enough of a supply of this so I can go right out and lay in the cap strips. Looks like it's clearing up out there today. We might even get some flying done today. Only need one more page back and we could finish off that newsletter too. I could be doing that newsletter today. Let's see what we have here. This is a good place to use up your scrap balsa, the stuff you've been saving in that little shoebox in the corner. Again, that stripper is a real handy little thing, otherwise you'd be cutting this out by hand. And it sure wouldn't be that accurate, that's for sure. I don't want to even use that. I got smaller pieces. In fact, I only need one more. I don't know why I'm taking two for. If you hold your thumb near the razor blade, you can get it to cut good right to the end, but needless to say, if you put your finger in the razor blade, it's a real thrill. Goes pretty fast. And when you come across a cap strip that isn't just perfect, just break it off and throw it away. You don't get any reward for using up the last of the bad cap strips. These go in pretty fast. We're just going to tack them in until we can turn the wing upside down. Once we get it upside down, we'll double up on all the joints. And then we'll put the bell crank in and then sheet the whole bottom of the wing and cap strip it. And we'll be ready for some block sanding. And then making up our wing tips, adjustable lead out guide, tip weight box, and the last thing will be the flaps. And then of course the finish. We'll hinge this same way we did with the elevators and do it all the finishing in one operation, instead of the more modern technique of leaving the flaps off and elevators until it's done. Alright, that should give us enough cap strip wood. I'm going to start putting them in. Okay, we got one wing all cap stripped. We're going to start working on this one. I got the outside tip flattened off, sanded off. We're pretty much ready on this guy. Do this wing and we can pull it off the board and turn it over and look at the alignment the other way. We're into this, it's almost noon, almost time for some lunch. We're putting the last of the cap strips on now. Recheck the alignment. The alignment stayed pretty good throughout the building. We got one more cap strip here to go. This will be about the end of it. We can pull this wing off the board. turn it over and check the alignment on the opposite side. Make up a bell crank for it. Okay. Trim off this. Okay, you got the old sanding block. Those edges nice and square for the block wingtips we're going to make. Okay. Strips of inventory here for the bottom. Now what I have this wing actually glued down to the table, so I'm going to have to break the blocks loose one by one. These are my alignment blocks. Okay, now peel the tape up. Tape just held the trailing edge in position while I jigged everything up before. Okay, we're going to get this piece off of here. Usually when you work this way, a couple of drops of hot stuff will drip down onto the table and give you fits when you're trying to take the wing up, which is what's happening right now. I've got a drop of hot stuff right here. A drop of hot stuff here. Wing up there. Now we have the bottom of the wing. Now what we're going to try to do is reverse this, jig it up in such a way that we can even off the spar, which is sticking up a little bit. It's a little bit oversized. Even off all the ribs, put our controls in, and then sheet this up. That'll be our project this afternoon. Now when I turn this over, I jig this up on a piece of wood with the trailing edge flat, and I measure the leading edge, and it's out by about 1/8 of an inch on one tip. In fact, it's out a little bit on both tips, but it's not permanently glued yet. Remember, this is still loose. We still have time to fool with this. So what I'll do from this point on, this is good old-fashioned Windex, ammonia. And if I spray the wood real good, it will assume that shape eventually. This is the same thing you would do if you were going to wet down a piece of sheeting and then wrap it. What this does, it releases the wood cells a little bit. And once they're released, they'll take a set to whatever form you put them in. Now I have this wing set almost dead perfect according to the machinist rule. So I'll just spray away here, let this dry the rest of the afternoon. This is a really an old trick from the 50s. Used to soak these in bathtubs. No need to soak it. A little spray in a Windex will loosen this right up. Now if it doesn't come out on the first try, you have to go back a little further. Go past the direction, like in this case we're 1/8 of an inch up on the tips. We'll put 1/8 of an inch down and let it set overnight. That'll ensure that we really have a nice wing here. We really have a top-notch wing. Okay, just before I put this away, I'm going to check with my machinist ruler, make sure I got it right on the money. Okay. We more or less have to let this. Okay, we're going to let this sit now. Once that all dries up, we'll check it again. If it's not right, we'll just repeat this whole thing until we get that dead straight. And once we sheet the top of the wing, we're pretty much locked into that. The wing jigged up here. Bunch of things holding it in position. It's drying out pretty well right now. I guess another hour or so it'll be dry. You can check the alignment again. Before you go on to sheeting the bottom of any D-tube wing, you really have to get the alignment right. If you have to, and if it's not right, you cut the ribs off the spar and re-glue it. And just keep breaking it and putting it back in position until that wing just sits out perfect. It really seems like a pain in the ass at the time, but you'll be glad you did it when you go fly the airplane. This wing was out by about 1/8 of an inch on both tips. When I reversed it, which means the table is probably out a little bit by 1/16, or I wasn't accurate when I glued it. But it's no problem. You just re-glue it when it's backside up and keep going over and over until you get it just right. You can keep breaking them glue joints and putting them back anytime you want. I'm just putting a coat of clear on a stab, which we finished today. It's got 2 coats now on it. And I think tomorrow we'll be ready to get into some sanding, 320, knock down all the high edges and stuff. You can see all that block sanding paid out. We got a pretty nice stiff unit here. All the ribs are sticking up just about the right height. Everything has a nice rounded edge on it. I put a little bit of blue in with the clear. This is clear light coat. Put a little bit of blue in with it. You can put a little bit of any color in there. If the plane's going to be red, put a little bit of red in there. The object it added is just so you can see where the dope is. Otherwise it's kind of a hard thing to see, especially in an area with fluorescent lights. Once this has about 3 coats of clear on a silk span, 50-50 thinner, we can just about hit it with some sandpaper. Oh, that looks pretty nice. Now 1 more coat will do that. As soon as you start to see a little shine coming up, then you know you're getting down there and be ready for some sanding. Our wing dried out almost perfect. I have to just recheck it in the morning and I'll be ready to put the leading edge back on that wing. Sheet the bottom, put the bell crank in it. At this point in time, it's best to take advantage of anything you can check. And that 1/8 of an inch that the wing was out would have meant a lot of difference. Would have been a big trim headache somewhere down the road. So you're always better to pay me now or pay me later. In this case, I'm glad we're going to get that over with. And by tomorrow that wing should be set real nice. You leave it set overnight. If you have to, you can hit it again. Ammonia, Windex. Windex has ammonia in it. Anything will really do a good job. Now what I like to do with these kind of deals, I'm going to do it right now. Is get a striping brush. This is a striping brush. It's got long hairs on it. What I like to do with this is just outline all the edges. A couple of coats. Now if you can see what I'm doing here, I don't know if you can see this. Now this without adding a lot of weight adds a lot of strength to the top of the ribs, because that's where this silk span is going to rip after X amount of years or with some abuse. Oops, we got a phone call there. The phone's been pretty quiet all day, I'm really surprised. But getting these edges is real important. Okay, good, my wife's got the phone. I like to put about 5 to 6 coats of dope over the rib edges, because that's where this thing is going to want to rip, is right over those edges. And it helps when you do start sanding it down with 320 and such. You're not going to run into a big problem going through and then making little patches. Even though patching it up is no big deal at this point. You don't want to patch it after you get ink lines and everything on it. Right now it's no big deal to patch it. But it's got to be a striping brush. A regular brush won't carry enough of the paint with it to really be effective. You can see how quick I can do this. You can wait an hour or so and put an extra coat on. I'm going to do the whole top while it's on video. This is a real important part of building a built-up structure. If you want it to really be front row material, those ribs have to be dead even, dead smooth. Because your eye will pick up a mistake real fast on this. On a foam wing, especially if you paint it white, you can get away with murder, but you can't get away with murder on these kind of wings. It's got to be right. Now I like to go right along the edge. Don't forget, I'm going to do this about 4 or 5 more times before this structure is finished. Now all this is going to do is add strength around the edge, without adding a lot of weight in the middle of the paper, or without adding a lot of weight to the rest of it. We haven't put any filler coat at all on this tail yet. We're going to try to get away with using 1 coat of filler, because this is a real nice tail. This tail should have no problem. I think 1 coat will be plenty. Fill this right in and we'll be all set. But around those edges, now we're going to be sanding them out for sure. And we're going to have to be real careful we don't go through. The old striping brush is a good trick. Anywhere you have an edge where you might have a tendency to buff through, striping brush. That's probably a good trick to do even on foam wings. What I used to do on foam wings is put a little bit of extra filler and stuff right by where the wood joints are, so you can kind of bury them in paint without adding a ton of weight to the rest of the airplane. Okay, now I'm just going to finish the top of this and then we'll shut the video off. You get the idea of what I'm doing. 5, 6 coats. On a wing maybe you can put 10 with the striping brush. 5 or 6 for the tail. I don't imagine we're going to be going crazy buffing out the tail. But we're sure going to want to put a nice finish on this. And most of all, we want it to last. I don't want to a year from now have to worry that this silk span's going to pop off the ribs or something. And that's about it. Alright, you let that dry an hour, give it another coat, an hour, another coat. Sometimes you can put 3 or 4 coats on in one day. Bottom still has to be done. I'll do that off video. I'm sanding this out with 400, and I'm going to put 1 more coat of clear on it before I really detail all the finish on it. Got to be real careful right now not to go through the silk span. To look for brush hairs, get the brush. Okay, we're going to give this 1 more coat of clear over the ribs. So I can hold this down where you can see it. Using a striping brush. This is Sig Light Coat Thin 50/50 with DuPont 3608S. That's a real cheap thinner. You want to use cheap thinner when you do dope. It's a lot cheaper than buying dope thinner, that's for sure. Works just as good. You can save yourself some money doing that if you're not super rich. Again, I want to repeat, this is an important step. A lot of people are not familiar with doing built-up structure, and they always, when they do make one, silk span will rip right at the edge as you're sanding it. And if you put 5-6 coats of extra dope around it, like I'm doing right now, and right over the ribs, you can avoid that problem. Don't be afraid to put a few extra coats on the top of the airplane. That's the part you're really going to see, and you're probably going to sand and buff a little more than you do on the bottom. Although most of the planes I saw on the front row this year were buffed top and bottom. All real nice workmanship. Okay, again, I go around the edge. A striping brush is the only reasonable way of doing this. Just want to paint like an 1/8 inch stripe, covering the edge where the tissue goes over. I always put a little fisheye killer in the dope when I mix it. It's not real important that it be 50-50. It could be 40-60 if you like brushing it on thin. You should let each coat of dope dry reasonably. If you can put it outside, it'll dry in 4 or 5 hours. If you keep it in a damp cellar, it'll take an hour or so to dry. I'll finish this up and then we're going to get on with the next part of this. Alright, I'm going to finish this up. No sense putting that on the video, but be aware we're just going to keep putting coats on until this structure becomes shiny, a little bit shiny. Just I can hold it up to the light and see the shine. And then we'll go on with a little bit of filler coat, and that'll be it, and into silver. Step in the wing removal process. We broke the wing off of the jig, turned it completely over, and have all blocks that are exactly 1.5 inches high. We got the whole wing suspended up. The blocks are glued to the table, and this piece of 1.5 inches is glued to the table, taped on. And we've got the wing completely shoved into position, actually glued the wing to the jig in position that is perfectly level. Now we're going to run by and nail down all these ribs. See the gaps in the rib sheeting? We're going to nail the ribs to the spar and glue the leading edge sheeting on. First we're going to have to put the belt crank and the controls in. I'm going to have to make up a belt crank assembly. But this is important now. Now this wing is almost dead level, and I can measure it with machinist rule, make sure it's exactly 1.5 inches off the table, every center line on it. It's real easy to do. Of course you need a glass covered table, a flat table. So this will be the next step. Then when we pull this off the jig, we'll turn it over and put it right back in the same jig and make sure it lines up dead nuts the other way. Now if it is still warped at that point in time, then we have to go back to the ammonia and keep bending and twisting. Now that we have the wing pretty well lined up, I'm going to go by and I'm gluing all the ribs to the inside of the leading edge sheeting here with hot stuff. So kind of firm it up so we can work on it a little easier. Double check all the alignments here. Especially these center ribs where the double sheeting is, we want them to be nice and strong. And just go right by, lay that hot stuff right in there. I like to kick it off, I don't want to waste too much time on this. You can just go right down the wing. I measured this all up, the machinist rule, and it looks pretty accurate now. Of course we're going to find out. Once we take this off the board, it might spring again. We might have to go back and do that over 2 or 3 times. But when we're done, we'll probably have a plane that we won't have to tweak the flaps on. Unlike some planes I've seen, look real accurate when you go to join the 2 foam wing halves, and then you get out at the field and you got to tweak and trim tabs all over them, including my own. It can really be a pain. This way you're kind of paying the price in the shop. You get out to the field, this thing should be pretty even. Gluing each one of these ribs in is going to strengthen this up a little bit too, that's for sure. The more little boxes you can make on the wing construction, the stronger this is going to be. In the old days with Ambroid, this would really get to be a drag. This would be part of the job nobody wanted to do. Again, the more times you can jig the wing up and get it lined up. It really doesn't matter how you do it. The better and more true it's going to be. You build in the strength instead of putting it in later.
Won that night 2-0 over the Pirates. A 5-hitter for Danny McDevitt, who never realized the stardom for which he was destined. After the final out, the crowd filed silently and sadly out of the stately old ballpark for the last time. Out of respect for the dearly departed, there was no ravishing for souvenirs. The grounds crew methodically covered the infield and the pitcher's mound with tarp, as if there was a game the following day. But the Dodgers never came back. No team did, and within a few years, the grand old ballpark was leveled and replaced by apartments. Ebbets Field is gone, but many of us don't believe it. We're 12 years old, and Ebbets Field still exists in our minds. It always will be.
Now here I cut out the bell crank for the Nobler as per the plans. Cut it at a 1/4-inch Delrin. I'm going to make the rod for it. I want to mount it the way it's mounted in a foam wing. I don't like the way they mount the bell crank in a Nobler. And I'm going to reverse the bell crank, of course. I'm not going to put it in with the push rod on the inside of the circle and the push rod lined up dead center at the middle of the throw with the center line of the wing. Now that's a little bit different than the plans show, but that usually will work a little better on killing off some of the gyroscopic recession. Now, this bell crank here I made just a little bit bigger than 3 inches because I want to use one of my handles that's a little bigger than 4 inches. And hi, this is Tom Niebuhr. He stopped in for a cup of coffee this morning. He's embarrassed to be on a video, but it's too bad. His wife don't know he's here.
It's not that I'm embarrassed.
We just drilled out the holes in the bell crank to lighten it up, and he's bringing back some of the videotapes we loaned out here.
It really looks more like Swiss cheese, is it not?
Yeah, why don't you take a bite out of that? Show the camera. And here's the bell crank assembly with the rod in it. I'm going to mount this just like in a foam wing. It's 1/4-inch Delrin. I drilled it out a little bit, try to lighten it up. Not really too important. Silver solder eyelets on both ends with a copper washer in between. 3/32 hole for the rod. That's kind of a nice way to make a bell crank. That works real good. That's the way you mount it on a foam wing. That's the way I would mount it on a foam wing anyway. I'm going to put the lead outs and a push rod on there, and that'll be these are the lead out ends we just soldered on. That's kind of a nice way of doing it. Notice there's no really sharp bends in the wire. And you leave that loop long enough that it doesn't rub on the push rod, and you don't have any trouble with interference when it goes around rubbing on either the arrow shaft or the push rod. Leave them ends nice and long. I like solid lead outs. Solid lead outs are my choice. You probably could do the same thing with cable. No sharp bends, and you see the little tang that I leave hanging out. Now that eventually you can grind a little bit of that off, but a good solder joint through the for soldering a washer onto the push rod. You'll see when I take this out, I shove it into a block of balsa wood that holds the alignment. Stay bright silver solder, and when you're done, clean it good with alcohol, paint thinner, something. Make sure that joint is clean. I make a Z-bend and then take out the play with the washer. You'll see when this is finished. There's a little picture showing the washer is soldered onto there. There's a Z-bend. That washer will take out all the play. Hold the push rod a minimum up off the bell crank just so the lead outs will clear nice during movement. And you polish this up with a little bit of sandpaper and some alcohol. Get that soldering flux off. We're just going to use a regular 3/32 push rod, traditional stuff, no arrow shafts in this little plane. And the odds are good that that's never going to break. There's other ways of doing it, but this is a real nice, neat, clean way. Silver solder, Stay Bright silver solder is the best. If you can't get it, make your hobby shop order it. That's the only way to solder these parts. The assembly, the push rod, just shove it right in. Now, there's no up and down play on that push rod now, very minimum. And yet you still need some flex this way to make up for the horn swing. Okay, we got the lead out soldered, the bell cranks all made up, eyelets soldered onto the wire. Keep heat away from Delrin. The reason for doing this is you never solder near Delrin. Delrin gets very brittle when you solder again, and you get the soldering acid off of it. A couple of people have lost planes already because they got soldering acid on the Delrin. And a year later, or maybe a month later, that Delrin will just crack and deteriorate.